Ron.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Planning and Zoning meeting for November the 2nd, 2017. Our first order of business will be our public hearings, and our first public hearing will be Section 405.250, off-street loading and parking, Amendment-92. Mr. Hamp.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Excuse me. This is a reapproval request for revision of Section 405.250, off-street loading and parking, ADM-92. I'd like to ask to make part of the public hearing record the municipal code by reference, the public hearing notices, and my planning and zoning report.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak on behalf of that tonight? Hearing none, we'll close that public hearing and open up our next public hearing, which will be the Main Street Apartments Site Plan -117.
This is the approval request for the Main Street Apartments SP 117, located at 201 East Main Street. Property is zoned C2 General Commercial. On September 29th, 2017, a request was filed for a site plan approval to allow a commercial business on the first floor and apartments on the second and third floors of an existing building located at 201 East Main Street. Once again, I'd like to ask to make part of the public hearing record the municipal code by reference, my planning and zoning report, the public hearing notices, and the Warrenton 2016 comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. Would anyone else like to speak tonight on behalf of the Site Plan 117 for the Main Street Apartments? Hearing none, we'll close that public hearing and open up our last public hearing, and that's the Main Street Apartments Conditional Use Permit -55.
This is the Main Street Apartments CUP-55 conditional use permit approval request. On September 29th, 2017, a request was filed for conditional use permit approval to allow commercial business on the first floor and apartments on the second and third floors of an existing building located at 201 East Main Street. Per Appendix A, 1A4, a conditional use permit is required. This conditional use permit approval request has been submitted by the applicant along with the site plan SP 117 approval request as required per Section 405.286C. I'd like to ask to make part of the public hearing record the municipal code by reference, the public hearing notices, my planning and zoning report, and the 2016 Warrenton comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. Would anyone else like to speak tonight on behalf of the Conditional Use Permit -55? Hearing none, we'll close that public hearing and open up our regular planning and zoning meeting for this evening with our minutes from the October 12, 2017 special meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Mrs. Scott, second by Mr. Cooper to approve the minutes as submitted. Any other questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Costello is absent. Mr. Deitch?
Yes.
Mr. Cullum?
Yes.
Mrs. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Barton?
Yes.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Mr. Gerloff?
I was absent.
Mrs. Blondin is absent. Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
And Mr. Priest?
I was absent.
I was also absent too, but
So the motion passes, what, 5-0?
Yes.
Okay. We have, first order of business will be Section 405.250, off-street loading and parking, ADM-92.
This is a approval request for the revision of the Section 405.250, off-street loading and parking. It was requested by city staff because we've heard in the past that our parking was stricter than everybody else in the area. That's why I put the comparison of 15 different cities, surrounding cities in here for you guys to look at. And basically we're requesting a couple changes to be more in line with with everyone else. We really weren't that strict. The main difference that I believe that where people were having trouble was our existing code is based on net floor area. In the surrounding cities, the majority of them are all based on gross floor area. And where it becomes a problem for some of the developers is when they're trying to put together their site, they might not know who their specific customers are going to be, so it's pretty impossible for them to say what the proposed net floor area is going to be, where it makes it easier if they know I'm building this size of a building.
Nice.
So to go off of the gross floor area instead of the net floor area. And that was what the main thing we was trying to do to get in line with the other surrounding cities.
That tends to make sense.
Mhm.
And like I say, in reality, when we get specifics, we were sort of right in the middle with everybody else, but not everybody knows their exact customer up front when they're deciding if they're going to take on a project.
So what do you need from us tonight on this?
Either approve it as it is or make recommended changes so I
Recommendations.
can present it to the Board of Aldermen
Okay.
for their review and approval.
I'll make a motion to approve the changes as submitted.
And I'll second. Go ahead.
We have a motion by Mrs. Scott, second by Mr. Cullum, to approve the changes as submitted on section 405.250, off-street loading and parking. Any other questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Cullum?
Yes.
Mrs. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Barton?
Yes.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Mr. Gerloff?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
And Mr. Deitch.
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0 with 2 absent. Next order of business will be the site plan for the Main Street Apartments, -117.
Yes. The applicant's here if you have any specific questions.
Okay.
I don't really have any specific questions, but I have a specific concern.
Okay.
So
Can the applicant come step to the podium and state your name for the record, and then
Lori Miller.
Steve Miller.
thank you, Miss Miller.
my concern is the parking. I think per our ordinance, we're required to have 2 off-site park or off-street parking spots for every apartment, plus parking adequate for the total usage of the building, which would be also the commercial space. And if you are looking at 6 to 8 apartments, you're looking at 12 to 16 parking spaces required, and there are 10. And that doesn't give any consideration to the fact that there's a large commercial space that will also be developed, which will require parking. I love the project. I love the idea. My only concern is parking, and that downtown it's a big concern everywhere, but I just wanted to
If
throw
I could
that
say
out there
something
for
real quick.
discussion.
Yeah.
We have also had that same concern, and we have spent lots and lots of time out there measuring and remeasuring. And I think a part of that site plan, there was a kind of modified map of what we want to do in that back area. That was just us measuring with a tape measure and trying to abide by the rules that are set up for those parking issues. But if we can design it the way that we have it on that map, it allots for 18 spots, unless we have done something wrong with our design.
No, and maybe I'm reading the ordinances wrong, but it says, the ordinances say off-street parking, that much is required off-street parking, and in the downtown commercial zone, you can reduce what's required by 20% because they have access to that. And maybe I'm counting wrong, so I would love to be corrected because I love this project.
Okay,
So-
well, actually, in the section we just discussed on the first public hearing, 405.250M, our existing section of code, it does state that modification of the downtown commercial historic area parking requirements. The downtown commercial historic area is defined as Main Street from Highway 47 west to Elm Street. The total amount of parking space required for a given lot or parcel may be reduced by site plan review. So that does give some leniency. And then it does go into talk if there's any development where a mixture of residential uses and office or retail uses is permitted, the combined total number of parking spaces required for such combination of uses may be reduced by up to 20% where the same is justified.
And 20% is also called out later in the ordinance on the downtown, on that downtown district. There's another place that says you can reduce it by.
Yeah, 405.25M.
by
But what's
20%.
unique on Main Street is a public right-of-way. Just because your building's sitting there, that does not mean you have access or you have the right to them 4 spots. So if you start using your logic that they have to account for wherever their business can park, technically their customers can park anywhere on Main Street.
Right. And that's why I said it, the ordinance says off-street parking. It calls for off-street parking.
Okay.
So, and I'm assuming the 20% reduction is because you can count those common spots. I don't know. I have concern about parking there. And the minimum, I went through the uses, and the minimum use for that space would require 10 parking spots on the commercial space. So you have to add that to what they need for the apartments. So that's my concern.
You had said something about your plan for that back parking lot.
Mhm.
Is that the area that you're talking about clearing out and using for that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And if I may, we're very flexible. Obviously, as landlords, we want to utilize as much possible space as we can, but 6 to 8 was just a number. I mean, a lot of them will be 1-bedrooms also, and we're flexible.
Right. And we don't own the building yet. It's all contingent on this permit. So it's difficult to get in there and really start working on design plans and things like that when we don't actually own the building. So until we can really get in there and get a feel for what exactly we want to do as far as how many apartments and how we want to have them lined up, there's definitely the space that's available, but how everything's going to fit together, we just don't have that solid number.
Do you have any idea what kind of commercial use?
We have several people who have already come to us as far as a coffee shop, antique shop, maybe a combination of the two. Nothing's been set in stone, but that's kind of like that's kind of the feel that we would like to see in there. I would rather not put another restaurant in there, or I don't think we need another bar on Main Street. That's just me personally. I don't want the insurance or the responsibility for that. But that's kind of what we're leaning towards, and very, very interested. As a matter of fact, she's already been working out her business plan and things like that for a coffee shop, which I thought would be kind of fun, especially with those big windows in the front. Which would be kind of nice to have those apartments upstairs too, with that coffee shop down below. Something that opens early and closes early.
With any development you're gonna have in downtown Warrenton, you're gonna run into the same problem. You know, there's apartments, you have Brewski's, you have the wine shop, you have the bar. You know, if you go through and start counting parking stalls, nobody has met the guidelines for parking stalls on any of those projects. I would bet on that. So you're gonna cripple downtown, or anybody wanting to develop in downtown if you do. If you suddenly, now we're gonna require them, it wasn't required with the winery. You know, it wasn't required with the bar that's on the corner now to meet the stricter guidelines of the required parking stalls.
The winery has 10 parking spaces, and that building is only commercial, and it's much small, the commercial space is much smaller. So the potential for parking issues with this building is different. And I've been fighting that battle all day, because the other, with myself, by the way, the other side of that is, if you strictly enforce it, that size of building on that lot, you're never gonna meet the parking requirement regardless of what you do.
Correct.
And to tear down the building is really not the option that I want either. So you would have to be looking at some off-site parking, would be the only other option. So I just felt like the concern needed to be addressed.
Yeah, and we don't have the St. Charles, the old downtown, where you can have the off-site parking down by the river. So I just want to make sure that if we're talking about the parking spaces, if we have leeway by what Jack's saying, as far as for the parking spaces, and they've got the plans there already for something, I just don't want to hamper them with the parking spaces.
So how many exact parking spaces are we gonna have behind the building? Or you probably didn't.
Looks like 10.
Yeah.
The drawing shows 10 off-site,
So that would be enough for 5 apartments.
and then you have the, shared use of the streets. But yeah, 10 off-site is what they're showing.
Well, I'll make a motion and go ahead and approve the site plan as submitted.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Mr. Deach, second by Mr. Durbin, to approve the site plan as submitted. Does anybody else have any questions or comments at this time besides the concerns raised about the parking? Hearing none, we'll take a roll call vote.
Mrs. Scott?
You call me first. This is not fair. I'm gonna say no.
Mr. Barton?
Yes.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes?
Mr. Gerloff?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Mr. Deach?
Yes.
And Mr. Cullen?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-1 with 2 absent. And that'll come in front of the Board of Aldermen on
21st, I believe.
that long? November 21st?
Yes.
November 21st. Okay, next order of business will be the conditional use permit -55.
And that's the conditional use permit approval for the same project here. And because it's multifamily is why it requires a conditional use permit approval.
Anybody got any questions for those Millers? And that's the only condition that,
That's what required it to have
To
to
go
have
in
the
front of that.
conditional use permit. All multifamily requires
Right.
conditional use permit approval.
With the approval of all of this, do they have to come back before P and Z with their site plan and everything, showing how this is all gonna be?
No, I think what they've submitted, it shows exactly what's going to be outside.
Okay.
When they go to do the interior renovations, they'd have to submit building plans and get the building plans reviewed and approved, but that would just be through the building department, not through P and Z and the Board of Aldermen.
And we're prepared to do that.
So this is a conditional use, and this is not gonna be a popular statement either, but I would like to recommend that we put a condition that it be 6 apartments or less due to the parking.
and you guys, at this time, you're saying you don't even have an idea.
Until we can really get in there and really look hard at what's going on in there. I don't feel comfortable really messing with much of the walls or anything like that until it belongs to us. So we've actually only been in the building twice, just because it doesn't belong to us.
Right.
So,
I think 6 is fair.
but I think 6 is fair.
And that would alleviate the parking, because I think that's gonna be a problem, that if you're gonna own these apartments, they're gonna hound you. You know, I know if I was renting a place, I'd want a place to park. Not have to rely on city street parking all the time, so. But that would alleviate the parking problem if it's 6.
It would make me, it would be, it would give me some,
I think it's a fair
would
compromise.
put me at
Okay.
ease.
No, I think that's totally true. I'm trying to park in some place that I'm renting, and well, somebody's parked back behind there, and I gotta try to find a place on the street 2 blocks away, and I'm carrying groceries.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
I think 6 is a good idea.
Yeah, I think, and just to let you know, we're all ecstatic about the project.
Oh,
Ecstatic. Anybody, because I said something to somebody today, anytime somebody's wanting to do something downtown and renovate something downtown, we're all excited about that, because we definitely want to be flexible in that process, but at the same time, we've got to be careful about what we,
And just so
recommend to
you,
the.
just so you know, our intentions are to keep the whole Nieberg name and the outside of the historical value in the front of that building. It needs some TLC.
Oh, sure.
It needs some paint and some windows and some tuck pointing and probably a lot of that, but our goal is to try to keep most of that stuff as much as we possibly can and still stay safe, if that makes sense.
Does anybody else have any questions or concerns, or can you agree?
Well, if they can live with 6, I think that's a good compromise.
Can you step to the podium and state your name, Mrs. Brent?
My name is Teresa Brent from Brent Development. First of all, I want to hope you feel welcome. I'm your neighbor, so if you need anything, come over. I just wanted to say, as far as parking, I who graciously let the city...
Can you state your name first? So.
Oh, Teresa Brent from Brent Development.
Thank you.
So I graciously let the city use my parking lot anytime they want to, which they have often. So I know parking is an issue in our city. We need to, there are various places that the city needs to own, and you just purchased one behind my building, which is, great, but we need more parking in the city for businesses. And that's a city issue, not just theirs.
Right.
So
Thank you.
I
very
hope
much.
that you will address that, but
Okay.
mostly welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brent. That's good to hear. Anybody else have any questions or comments? We'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to accept the conditional use with the condition that there be no more than 6 apartments.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Scott, second by Mr. Deeds, to approve the conditional use permit -55 with the addition that there be no more than 6 apartments built in the building. Any other questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Barton?
Yes?
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Mr. Gerloff?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Mr. Deitch?
Yes.
Mr. Cullum?
Yes.
Mrs. Scott?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0 with 2 absent. That will also come in front of the City Council on November the 21st, and thank you for your patience and cooperation.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And good luck. We'll close the regular meeting and turn the meeting over to the Planning and Zoning Officer, Mr. Hant.
Only thing I have is, I believe tomorrow the Express Liquor will open to the public. They're on West Veterans Memorial. So that, new business, hopefully.
That's awesome.
I think his goal is to be open tomorrow.
I poked my head in there a couple times. It looked like they've been busy, so.
Yeah, they've been working hard
And
in
then
there, and he's
next-
got it stocked, so should be lots of options.
And then next month, we're moving forward, according to the paper, that we have a meeting next month already.
We should have, yes, sir.
Okay, sounds good. Any questions or comments for the good of the group? Entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Mr. Deitch, second by
Second.
Mr. Gerloff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Have a good evening. Thank you.